Welcome back to Enigma of the Unknown, where we dive deep into the dark corners of real-life horror and mysteries. Tonight, we uncover 3 haunting stories that will send chills down your spine. From a cursed mansion in Ohio where tragedy still echoes through its haunted halls, to a bridge haunted by cries of the lost, and a sinister house where a brutal family murder has left a permanent scar. Each story holds secrets that refuse to rest. So, dim the lights, settle in, and prepare for a journey into some of Ohio's most haunted places. Story number 1. House number 9 on West Avenue. When Jake Taylor first laid eyes on the house at 9 West Avenue, he knew he had to step inside. It was an unusual feeling, part professional curiosity, part an underlying fear. The house stood amidst bare oak trees, like a living nightmare in the heart of Cleveland. It was old and sinister, with cracked walls and darkened windows that seemed to have witnessed unspeakable horrors. The 1911 murder of the Rowe family had shaken the entire city. Their brutal end was still whispered about in local folklore. No one knew exactly what had happened on that fateful night, but rumors told of a family of 5 slaughtered, and the police never found the killer. An unsolved case, a mystery that might never be solved. Since then, the house had been abandoned, and West Avenue, once lively, was haunted by yet another shadow. For Jake, this was only the beginning. As a journalist who covered eerie and mysterious events, Cleveland was his latest stop on a journey to uncover untold stories. And this house, this lair of horror, might become his biggest story yet. He glanced up at the dark windows, half expecting to see someone staring back at him from inside. But whether someone was watching or not, he knew he couldn't turn back. He was here, and the only thing left to do was to go inside. Jake slowly pushed open the front door of the house. The old wood groaned, letting out a long, weary sigh. He turned on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the dusty, dim living room. The house was completely silent, yet Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was alive within it. Not in the usual sense, but in some twisted, menacing way. As he ventured deeper, the air in the house felt oppressively heavy. Each step he took echoed in the hollow space, and each echo seemed to be answered by a distant whisper. On the living room wall, an old photograph still hung, a family posing happily, holding hands in front of this very house. It was the Rowe family, but eerily, as Jake looked closer, the eyes of each family member seemed to stare back at him, their gazes hollow and lifeless. "It's just the light playing tricks," Jake muttered, though he didn't quite believe it himself. Moving on, he entered the kitchen, where the smell of dampness was overwhelming, and broken dishes lay scattered on the table. Everything was frozen in time, from the overturned teapot on the table to a pair of chopsticks lying on the floor, as though death had captured this moment, refusing to let it go. It was as if the house wanted to keep everything trapped, never letting anything escape. Just then, a soft creaking sound echoed from upstairs, a faint, subtle noise but unmistakable. Jake froze, listening. His heart pounded, and he felt a chill crawl down his spine. He tried to convince himself it was just old wood settling, just the house expanding under the strain of time. But then the creaking came again, closer this time, as though someone were moving stealthily upstairs. Jake had no choice, he had to investigate. He gripped his flashlight tightly, holding his breath as he crept up the stairs. Each step on the wooden staircase creaked under his weight, echoing strangely, as if the house were answering back. As Jake neared the top of the stairs, he heard a whisper. It was faint, almost inaudible, yet unmistakably clear. "Someone is here," the whisper said. Jake froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand, illuminating a dark space ahead. In that moment, he felt he had crossed into another realm, a place that did not belong to his world. It was as though he stood at the edge of an abyss, just one step away from a plunge he could never return from. A shadow flickered at the end of the hallway, a vague shape, appearing briefly before vanishing back into the darkness. Jake stared, his eyes wide and breathing shallow. Someone, or something, was watching him. There was no doubt. He could feel an icy shiver slithering down his spine, aware of unseen eyes boring into him. He didn't know how long he stood there. It might have been just a moment, or it might have been a lifetime, but when he finally mustered the courage to turn around, he had only one thought: to leave. Immediately, as he hurried down the stairs and out of the house, Jake felt as though the house itself were breathing, its walls contracting around him. He stepped out into the night, his back drenched in sweat. But as he stood under the dim streetlight, looking back at the house, something strange happened. From an upstairs window, a cold, blue light flickered briefly, like a pair of eyes watching him. Eternally, Jake said nothing more. He simply understood that 9 West Avenue wasn't just an old, haunted story. It was alive, it breathed, and tonight, it had touched him. Jake Taylor couldn't sleep. Ever since he left 9 West Avenue, everything in his life felt twisted and strange. Images of the faint shadow at the end of the hallway and the cold blue light from the upstairs window haunted him every time he closed his eyes. The house had left a deep, dark mark on his mind, a grip that wouldn't let go. Determined to learn more, Jake threw himself into his work, seeking out every detail he could find about the Rowe family murder. He spent hours at the Cleveland City Library, poring over old newspapers and case files. Each yellowed page he turned shed new light on the tragedy. Yet the clearer the story became, the colder and heavier his mind grew. The Rowe family had consisted of 5 members: Richard Rowe, a successful lawyer, his wife Eleanor, a beloved figure in the community, and their 3 young children, Peter, Sarah, and Lily. One October night in 1911, the entire family was brutally murdered. The killer was never found, and there were no signs of forced entry. Locals said that the police had left in fear, feeling a suffocating heaviness in the house, as if the air had turned dense, oppressive, and suffocating. Everyone in the neighborhood had a story about 9 West Avenue. They said that on certain nights, they could still hear children screaming and Eleanor's voice faintly calling from the house. Some swore they had seen Eleanor's ghostly figure standing quietly by the window, her empty, desperate eyes watching the street as though waiting for something or someone to return. Jake began to realize that these were more than just rumors. They were pieces of a larger, darker mystery, one that the house itself wanted him to assemble. It wanted him to understand what had happened on that fateful night in 1911, to become part of its story. One evening, when Jake returned to his apartment, he found an envelope lying in front of his door with no return address. Inside was an old photograph of the Rowe family, taken right in front of 9 West Avenue. But something was wrong. The faces of each family member had been scratched out, leaving strange marks that stirred a deep unease. Eleanor's eyes were still hollow, but there was something beneath them, a rage that seemed trapped inside. A creeping dread began to settle in Jake's mind. He knew that what he was facing wasn't just an eerie local legend. Everything was pulling him back to 9 West Avenue, and this time, he couldn't approach as a mere journalist. He had to be a hunter, willing to dig deep to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Jake returned to the house at midnight. The old wooden door groaned as it had before, but this time, he sensed that something was welcoming him in. The house was still filled with the stale smell of mold and an oppressive silence, but the cold air was sharper now, almost like invisible fingers brushing against his skin. This time, he didn't linger in the living room but went straight upstairs, where the footsteps and shadows had once terrified him. Jake made his way to the last room at the end of the hallway, Eleanor's bedroom. The room was pitch dark, but there was a faint glint from a mirror on the wall, illuminating the far corner. Jake stepped closer and saw an old vanity table with a dusty journal lying on it. As Jake touched the journal, it felt cold, almost as if he were touching flesh. He flipped through the pages, his hands trembling. The scrawled handwriting of Eleanor appeared, filled with desperate, incoherent ramblings from her final days. I see him in the shadows. His eyes, black as the abyss, are always watching us. I can't escape his gaze. The children see him too. They scream every night. But no one believes us. No one knows the truth. No one sees the darkness in this house but us. And now we're trapped here forever. Jake felt a surge of terror as he read those lines. The shadow in the house wasn't just some eerie legend. It was real, a presence. A malevolent force the Rowe family had endured. And now, it was paying attention to Jake. As he closed the journal, he felt an icy breath brush against the back of his neck. He turned around, but the hallway was empty. Yet, in the mirror, he saw a shadowy figure standing just behind him. A dark, twisted shape with bottomless, cold eyes and a crooked smile. Jake leapt back, his heart racing, sweat chilling him to the core. He bolted from the room and dashed down the stairs. But the echo of his footsteps sounded like mocking laughter, as if the house was savoring his fear. Standing outside under the cold night sky, Jake looked back at the house. The faint light from an upstairs window blinked like an eerie pair of eyes. Watching him leave, Jake realized that he was no longer just an investigator. He had become part of the story. 9 West Avenue had chosen him, and the ghosts of the past wouldn't stop until he uncovered the entire truth. Jake Taylor returned to 9 West Avenue on a cold night. He knew he had no other choice. The house had burrowed deep into his mind, haunting him through Eleanor Rowe's diary, through the shadows he'd seen in the mirror, and through the icy whispers that filled his dreams. Jake felt as though the house had chosen him, pulling him into a mystery he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. The door swung open before he even touched it, as if someone had been waiting for him. He stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him with a hollow sound, echoing in the silent night. Jake felt that the house had changed, its atmosphere darker, the walls seeming to close in around him. The air felt thick and cold, seeping into his skin. He stood in the pitch-dark living room, gripping his flashlight tightly, scanning every corner. Everything looked as it had the first night he stepped inside. Yet there was something different, something warped. He felt as if someone was there, watching him, waiting. A noise came from upstairs, shattering the oppressive silence. Jake took a deep breath and began climbing the stairs, one careful step at a time. The old wooden steps creaked under his weight, as if warning him that there was no turning back. At last, he reached the end of the hallway. The door to Eleanor's room stood ajar, and as he entered, he saw a faint blue glow from the mirror on the vanity. In the mirror, he caught a glimpse of a woman seated, her empty eyes staring into the void, her expression somber and cold. It was Eleanor. "You've come, haven't you?" Her voice echoed softly, like it was reaching him from another world. Jake swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. Do you need my help?" he asked, though he had no idea what he could do for a spirit long dead. "I'm trapped here. We're all trapped," she said, her voice cracking. He won't let us go. The dark shadow." Eleanor couldn't say any more. A cold breeze swept through, and her image faded from the mirror's glow. Jake knew who he was, the dark shadow the Rowe family had seen before their deaths, the one Eleanor had written about with helpless terror in her diary. Whatever it wasn't human. It was a malevolent force that had claimed the house and trapped every unfortunate soul who'd crossed its threshold. Jake could feel that the shadow was waiting for him too. Just then, heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. They were slow, deliberate, but filled with menace. Jake spun around, shining his flashlight into the darkness, but saw nothing. The unseen shadow moved closer, and fear seeped into every part of him. "You will never leave," another voice whispered, cold and haunting. This wasn't Eleanor's voice. It was something darker, filled with hatred. It wasn't human. It was the thing that had tormented the Rowes with suffering and terror. Jake stepped backward, unable to take his eyes off the darkness in front of him. He tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat, as if an invisible hand was choking him. In his desperation, he understood that the house wanted more than to trap the dead souls within. It wanted to draw in the living, to make them a part of itself. He ran from the room, but darkness flooded the hallway, a thick mist wrapping around him. The house was no longer just a building, it was a living entity, moving, hunting him, and Jake was nothing but prey. He felt the shadow's breath on the back of his neck, and every time he glanced back, he saw the cold, empty eyes, two dark voids staring into his soul. He raced down the stairs, but the steps seemed to stretch on forever. There was no way out. The house had swallowed him whole, and he knew he would never escape. In a final moment, as he felt the darkness consume him, he turned around and saw the shadow standing right behind him. It had the shape of a man, but its face was empty, like a mirror reflecting his deepest fears. "Welcome, Jake Taylor," it whispered, its voice soft yet powerful, like the arrival of death itself. And then, everything went black. The next morning, people found the upstairs window of 9 West Avenue wide open. The dim light of dawn spilled into an empty room, but a chilling, haunting feeling lingered, as if the house had devoured yet another soul. From then on, locals claimed to hear footsteps and whispers echoing within the house. But this time, they swore they sometimes heard a new voice, the voice of a young man, calling out from the darkness, forever trapped in the house at 9 West Avenue. Story number 2. Franklin Castle and the Ghosts. Emily Parker stepped off the midnight train, inhaling the crisp autumn air in Cleveland, Ohio. The dim streetlights reflected off the damp streets, creating a scene both eerie and mystical. Her heart raced with anticipation for the adventure ahead. Franklin Castle, Ohio's most haunted house, awaited her exploration. As an architecture student with a passion for historical buildings and old legends, Emily had chosen Franklin Castle as the subject for her thesis. She had arranged to rent a room in the castle, which had recently been converted into a guest house after some renovations. The taxi pulled up at the castle gates. Under the pale moonlight, the castle stood in haunting splendor, both grand and intimidating. Its gray stone walls, looming towers, and tall, narrow windows looked down at her like watchful eyes. The old iron gate creaked as she pushed it open, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Good evening. You must be Emily Parker?" A warm voice called out. Henry Miller, the current caretaker of the castle, stepped out from the shadows with a welcoming smile. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for allowing me to stay here," Emily replied, trying to hide her nervous excitement. "We're happy to have you. This castle holds many interesting stories. I'm sure you'll find plenty of material for your research," he said with a knowing smile. They stepped inside, and Emily immediately felt a chill run down her spine. The long hallway's old wooden floors creaked under each step, and dim wall sconces cast eerie shadows that danced on the walls. "Your room is on the 2nd floor, right next to the library. If you need anything, just let me know," Mr. Henry said, handing her an ornate antique key with intricate designs. "Thank you very much." After settling in, Emily couldn't resist exploring the castle. With her camera and notebook in hand, she began wandering down the corridors. The ancient portraits on the walls, depicting members of the Tiedemann family with eyes that seemed to follow her, made her shiver slightly. When she reached the library, she was enchanted by the rows of old books. The scent of aged paper and leather filled the air with a timeless charm. She ran her fingers along the spines, her eyes stopping at a lone journal lying on a table. She opened it, finding pages filled with black ink that had faded over time. Suddenly, a cold breeze blew through, extinguishing the candle on the table. Emily looked up to see that the window had somehow opened. "Strange, I thought I closed it," she murmured. As she went to close the window, she turned back to find that the journal had disappeared. A sense of unease crept over her, but she tried to brush it off. "Maybe I left it somewhere else," she told herself. That night, Emily returned to her room and tried to sleep. Just as she was drifting off, she heard light footsteps in the hallway outside. "It's probably Mr. Henry," she thought, but the footsteps stopped right outside her door, then fell silent. She opened her door to look outside, but the hallway was empty. Dim light spilled onto the cold stone walls, and at the end of the hall, she thought she saw a faint shadow pass by. "Is anyone there?" she called, but received no reply. Feeling a chill, she closed her door and resolved to ask Mr. Henry about it in the morning. The next day at breakfast, she approached Mr. Henry. "Mr. Henry, I heard footsteps outside my door last night. Is there anyone else staying here besides us?" Emily asked. "No, it's just you and me here. Old houses like this make strange noises when the wind blows." He replied with a light chuckle. Not wanting to bother him further, she let it go, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Determined to learn more, she headed to the Cleveland Public Library to research Franklin Castle's history. She discovered that the castle had been built by a wealthy businessman in the late 19th century and had seen many family tragedies. His wife and children had all died within a short period, fueling rumors and speculation. There were stories of hidden rooms in the castle, where strange, unexplained events had allegedly occurred. Former residents and staff recounted sightings of a woman in a black dress, believed to be the ghost of Mrs. Louise, still wandering in search of something. Returning to the castle, Emily decided to investigate further. She recalled a hidden door she had glimpsed in the library the previous afternoon. Gently pushing on a bookshelf, she found it rotated, revealing a narrow passage leading to the basement. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her flashlight and descended the stone steps. The air was damp and carried the stale scent of mold. At the bottom of the stairs, she found herself before an old wooden door. Opening it, she entered a small room, where an old photograph lay on a table. The photo depicted a beautiful woman in a black dress, her sorrowful eyes staring directly into the camera. "This must be the former lady of the house," Emily whispered. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. She felt a chilling breath at the back of her neck and heard a faint whisper. "Why are you here?" Emily spun around but saw no one. She tried to turn her flashlight back on, but it wouldn't work. In the darkness, she saw a pair of glowing eyes staring straight at her. She screamed and bolted out of the room, racing up the stairs without daring to look back. When she reached the library, she slammed the bookshelf shut, breathing heavily. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She realized that this castle wasn't merely an architectural relic, but held secrets and restless spirits. Could I have awakened something? She wondered, gazing into the dark beyond her window. The faint moonlight fell across her face, casting an eerie, haunting glow. Despite her fear, her curiosity and determination drove her to continue. Yet she had no idea that what awaited her would defy all her expectations. The weak sunlight seeped through the large windows of Franklin Castle the next morning, but it wasn't enough to dispel the chill and gloom that pervaded the place. Emily Parker woke up feeling drained and anxious. The strange events from the previous night haunted her, keeping her on edge. Determined not to let fear control her, she resolved to dive deeper into the mysteries surrounding Franklin Castle. Leaving her room, she took a stroll through the historic streets of Cleveland, the cobbled roads, old houses with intricate architecture, and the chilly autumn air created an atmosphere that was both serene and haunting. Emily decided to stop by a quaint, vintage-style cafe where she hoped to encounter locals familiar with the castle's history. At the cafe, she met Mrs. Johnson, a silver-haired woman with deep-set, perceptive eyes. The cafe owner had lived in Cleveland her entire life and knew its secrets well. "You're the one staying at Franklin Castle, aren't you?" Mrs. Johnson asked, her warm voice laced with curiosity. "Yes, I'm researching the castle's history for my thesis," Emily replied with a smile. "Do you know about the stories surrounding that place?" Mrs. Johnson tilted her head, a hint of caution in her gaze. "I've heard some rumors, but nothing specific. Could you tell me more?" Emily asked, hopeful to uncover more details. Mrs. Johnson sighed, gazing out the window as if recalling distant memories. Years ago, the Tiedemann family suffered terrible tragedies. His wife and children all died under mysterious circumstances. They say their spirits still linger in the castle, unable to find peace. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Is it true there's a ghost of a woman in a black dress? Yes, she often appears at night, drifting through the hallways. Many have seen her and heard her weeping, Mrs. Johnson replied, her expression grave. Back at the castle, Emily decided to jot down the information she'd gathered. As she entered her study, she noticed that the window was wide open, even though she distinctly remembered closing it before she left. A cold wind blew in, making the curtains billow. As she walked over to close the window, she heard a soft whisper behind her, "Emily." She spun around, but the room was empty. Her heart raced as she tried to reassure herself that it was just her imagination. But then, the chair near her desk began to slide, scraping across the wooden floor. Terrified, Emily backed away, tripping over the rug and landing on the floor. Looking up, she saw the faint figure of a woman in a black dress standing in the corner, her sorrowful eyes fixed on Emily. "Please, help me," the voice murmured, as gentle as a breeze. Before Emily could react, the figure vanished like smoke. Frightened yet captivated, Emily decided to investigate further. She remembered the secret room she'd found in the library before. This time, she prepared herself with a flashlight, camera, and a small knife for protection. Descending into the basement, she felt an even stronger sense of heaviness and chill. At the bottom of the stairs, she came to an old wooden door. Opening it, she entered a small room where an antique wooden box sat on a table. Opening the box, Emily discovered letters and a journal belonging to Rebecca Tiedemann, the family's youngest daughter. The journal revealed stories of family conflicts, jealousy, and hints of potential violence. Rebecca wrote about her mother, Mrs. Eleanor, being physically and emotionally abused by her father. She also mentioned the mysterious deaths of her siblings and her own fear that she would be next. "Father has changed. He's no longer the man we once knew. Mother cries every night, and I hear whispers in the hallways." Emily's heart pounded. Could Hannes have caused these deaths? She wondered. While reading, the door suddenly slammed shut. Startled, Emily rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge, as if locked from the outside. Heavy footsteps echoed outside, getting closer to the door. "Is someone there? Open the door!" she shouted, her voice filled with panic. There was no response, only loud, insistent knocking as if someone were trying to break in. Inside the room, her flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging her into darkness. Only the sound of her rapid breathing and racing heartbeat filled the room. Suddenly, a cold hand touched her shoulder. Emily screamed, turning around, but saw no one. Maniacal laughter filled the room, echoing off the walls. It felt as though an invisible force was pushing her to the ground. Struggling to her feet, she knew she had to escape. Gathering all her strength, she threw herself at the door, and miraculously, it opened. Emily raced up the stairs, feeling as if something was pursuing her. Once she reached her room, she slammed the door shut, breathing heavily, her face streaked with tears. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she fell into terrible nightmares. She dreamt of wandering through a dark maze, surrounded by distorted faces and ghostly hands reaching out, trying to pull her into the darkness. In her dream, Rebecca, a young girl about 10 years old with sad eyes and golden hair, appeared. "Your name is Emily, right?" Rebecca asked. "Yes. Who are you?" Emily responded, strangely comforted by the girl's calm presence. "I'm Rebecca. I came to warn you. Leave here before it's too late." "Why? What's happening?" "My father, he doesn't want the truth to come out. His spirit is still here, and he won't stop." Before Emily could ask more, the dream faded. She awoke drenched in cold sweat, her heart racing. Could that have been Rebecca's spirit trying to help me? She wondered. Emily realized she was tangled in a dangerous web of secrets, Continuing her investigation meant facing the malevolent spirit of Hannes Tiedemann. But if she gave up, spirits like Rebecca and Mrs. Eleanor would remain trapped forever. She decided to seek out Professor William Harper, a historian and paranormal expert she had heard of. Meeting him in his university office, Emily recounted her entire experience. "Emily, you're dealing with a powerful and dangerous force," Professor Harper said gravely. "Hannes's spirit may have become a dark entity, determined to keep his secrets buried." "What can I do? I can't just abandon them," Emily replied, her voice firm with resolve. "We need to perform a cleansing ritual to release the trapped spirits, but it's very dangerous. You must be prepared," Professor Harper warned, his eyes serious and somber. Late at night, the full moon cast a pale glow over Franklin Castle, leaving faint trails of light across the cold stone ground. Emily Parker, Professor William Harper, and Henry Miller stood outside the old courtroom, where they had decided to perform the ritual to cleanse the trapped spirits. The crisp night air mingled with the tension and anticipation in each of their hearts. "We need to keep our minds clear and not let fear control us," Professor Harper said, his voice calm yet resolute. "This ritual requires intense focus. Follow the instructions from this book carefully." Emily nodded, feeling strengthened by the support of the professor and Henry. She began preparing the necessary items, lighting white candles around the courtroom and sprinkling sea salt around the circle to protect them from malevolent forces. Henry carefully arranged ancient symbols they had found in old documents. Professor Harper opened an ancient book, beginning to recite invocations in Latin. His voice echoed through the room, blending with the soft sound of wind sweeping through the tall windows. Emily felt a powerful energy emanating from the candle circle, creating a mystical, intense atmosphere. Suddenly, the courtroom door slammed shut, startling all three. Their flashlights flickered before shutting off entirely, leaving them in absolute darkness. A chilling breeze swept through, carrying the faint scent of old roses, sending a shiver down Emily's spine. "We've begun." Professor Harper's voice broke the silence, filled with unshakable resolve. In the darkness, Emily sensed the presence of the spirits. A faint light started to form within the candle circle, and Elizabeth Tiedemann, along with other spirits, gradually appeared, their faces sorrowful yet hopeful. "We have heard you," Elizabeth spoke, her voice gentle yet powerful. "You've come to help us find peace." Emily stepped forward, working to steady herself. "We apologize for the mistakes of the past. We promise to ensure justice and fairness for all." Elizabeth moved closer, gratitude shining in her eyes. "We need acknowledgement and action from the community. Only then can we rest. We will do everything we can to ensure that what happened here will never happen again," Emily replied, her voice filled with emotion. Just as Emily and Professor Harper finished their pledge, the figure of Hannes Tiedemann appeared, his face twisted in anger and hatred. "You think you can change the past? I won't allow it." A fierce wind swept through, causing his face to waver and fade. "Justice can't be broken by empty promises." Professor Harper continued reading, his voice ringing out stronger from the ancient book, creating waves of light emanating from the candle circle. The light grew brighter, gradually dissolving Hannes's figure. The surrounding spirits began to glow, filling the room with a radiant, magical aura. "We've heard you," Elizabeth said, her voice brimming with hope. "Thank you for remembering us." A brilliant light flooded the entire courtroom, making everything appear pure and warm. The spirits slowly began to fade, leaving a sense of peace that filled the room. "At last, we can rest," Elizabeth said, her eyes filled with contentment. "Thank you for helping us," Emily replied, her voice resonating through the quiet space. The candlelight gradually dimmed, and all supernatural occurrences ceased. Warm, clear air enveloped Franklin Castle, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. The next morning, Emily and Professor Harper returned to the courtroom, now bathed in light and tranquility. They knew they had succeeded in freeing the spirits and breaking the dark curse. "We did it," Emily said, her voice brimming with joy. "Yes, this is an important step in ensuring that history isn't forgotten and mistakes aren't repeated," Professor Harper replied, a gentle smile on his face. Franklin Castle was no longer the most haunted house in Ohio. It had become a symbol of justice and hope, a place where history would be remembered and honored. Emily completed her thesis, earning praise from her university and bringing a deeper understanding to the community about the tragedies that had taken place. Henry, and Professor Harper sat outside the castle, gazing at the shimmering moonlight over Cleveland's night sky. "We've made a real difference," Emily said, her eyes filled with hope. "What happened here will never be forgotten." Story number 3. Crybaby Bridge in Middletown. Jack Thompson, a freelance photographer from New York, have always been drawn to haunted locations and the mysteries behind them. When I heard about Crybaby Bridge in Middletown, Ohio, I couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. The stories of a baby's cries echoing through the air and the shadowy figure of a grieving mother convinced me that this would be the subject of my next photography project. The bus dropped me off at a station near the bridge in the early evening. The chilly autumn air added an eerie atmosphere that suited my mood perfectly. The streets were deserted, and the dim streetlights cast soft reflections on the damp ground, creating a scene that was both peaceful and unsettling. I found myself standing in front of Crybaby Bridge, an old steel structure that had retained its haunting charm. The bridge lay nestled in a dense forest, and only a faint glow from the crescent moon filtered through the thick branches. "I have to stay calm," I reminded myself as I stepped closer to the bridge. A gentle echo of footsteps seemed to rise from beneath, like the soft cries of a baby. I listened closely, feeling a deep sense of sorrow within each faint cry. My flashlight illuminated shadows along the bridge, flickering through the gaps in the metal. Suddenly, I noticed a hazy figure of a woman dressed in black standing silently on the bridge, her eyes locked onto mine, filled with sadness and loneliness. I moved closer, but as I reached out to her, she vanished into a thick mist. My heart raced, uncertain of what to do next. "Why are you here?" I whispered, feeling a chill spread through me. There was no reply, only the sound of wind rustling through the trees and the soft cries continuing from beneath the bridge. Determined to uncover the truth behind these tales, I decided that I had to delve deeper into this place's mysteries. Later that night, back at a small inn near the bridge, I met Mrs. Linda Harris, a local who had lived in Middletown her entire life. She sat by the window, her eyes gazing distantly toward the bridge. I walked over and took a seat across from her. "Hello, Mrs. Harris. My name is Jack Thompson. I'm researching Crybaby Bridge for my photography project. Could you tell me more about the stories surrounding it?" I asked, keeping my tone friendly. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with wisdom and a hint of concern. "Ah, Jack, I knew you'd come. Crybaby Bridge is not an easy place to explore. Many have disappeared there, and on moonless nights, the cries of an infant echo endlessly from under the bridge. They say it's the spirit of a mother who lost her mind and dropped her child off the bridge before following after." "Why do you say that?" I asked, feeling my excitement build. Mrs. Eleanor Tiedemann, wife of Hannes Tiedemann, the architect who built the bridge, was driven to madness. She couldn't bear the loss of her child, and in her grief, she brought the baby to the bridge and jumped. Since then, her spirit and that of her child have lingered here, unable to find peace. She explained, her voice soft but heavy with sorrow. A chill ran through me, as if her words had summoned their presence before me. "Is there any way to help them rest in peace?" I asked, my determination growing. She believes that only when people recognize and remember them can their souls finally be at peace. But until now, few have dared to confront this truth, she said, looking deeply into my eyes. I realized that this was my calling. I resolved not only to capture images, but also to find a way to help these tormented souls find rest. With a newfound purpose, I continued my research and delved deeper into the secrets of Crybaby Bridge, unaware of the dangerous and terrifying journey that awaited me. The next morning, faint sunlight filtered through the large windows of Crybaby Bridge, but it wasn't enough to dispel the cold, eerie atmosphere that enveloped the place. I woke up feeling both exhausted and anxious. The strange events from the previous night still haunted me, leaving me restless, determined not to let fear take over. I decided to start the day by digging deeper into Crybaby Bridge and the mysteries surrounding it. I left my room and strolled around the quaint streets of Middletown, Ohio. The cobblestone streets, old houses with intricate architecture, and the chilly autumn air created an atmosphere both serene and haunting. I decided to stop by a small, vintage cafe where I hoped to meet locals who might know more about the bridge. At the cafe, I met Mrs. Linda Harris, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and deep, thoughtful eyes. She was the owner of the cafe and had lived in the town her entire life. She sat by the window, her gaze distant as she looked toward the bridge. "Hello, Mrs. Harris. I'm Jack Thompson. I'm researching Crybaby Bridge for my photography project. Could you tell me more about the stories surrounding it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone friendly. Mrs. Harris looked up at me, her eyes filled with wisdom and a hint of caution. "Ah, Jack, I knew you'd come. Crybaby Bridge isn't an easy place to explore. Many have disappeared, and on moonless nights, the cries of an infant echo relentlessly from below. People say it's the spirit of a mother who lost her mind and dropped her baby off the bridge, only to follow soon after." "Why do you say that?" I asked, feeling my excitement and dread rising. Mrs. Eleanor Tiedemann, wife of Hannes Tiedemann, the architect who built the bridge, went through a breakdown. She couldn't bear the loss of her child, and in her grief, she brought the baby to the bridge and jumped. Since then, her spirit and that of her baby have lingered here, unable to rest. She explained, her voice soft but weighted with sorrow. A chill swept over me, as if her words had summoned their presence right before me. "Is there any way to help them find peace?" I asked, my resolve growing. She believes that only when people remember them will their souls finally be at peace. But so far, few have dared to face this truth, she said, her gaze boring into mine. I felt that this was my calling. I resolved not only to capture images, but also to find a way to help these tormented souls rest. With determination, I continued my research, delving deeper into the secrets of Crybaby Bridge, unaware that I was embarking on a journey filled with danger and unimaginable horrors. Returning to Crybaby Bridge, I decided to record the information I had gathered. As I entered the bridge that afternoon, I remembered the secret door I had discovered. This time, I prepared thoroughly, flashlight, camera, and a small knife in hand for protection. Gently pushing a bookshelf, I saw it turn to reveal a narrow passage leading to a basement. My heart raced as I gripped the flashlight and descended the cold stone steps. The damp air smelled of mold. Reaching the bottom, I found myself facing an old wooden door. Opening it, I entered a small room with an antique wooden box on a table. Opening the box, I found letters and journals belonging to Rebecca Tiedemann, the youngest daughter of the family. The pages revealed tales of family conflict, jealousy, and even possible crimes. Rebecca wrote about how her mother, Eleanor, was abused both physically and mentally by her father. She also hinted at her siblings' mysterious deaths and her fear that she might be next. Father has become someone else. He's no longer the man we once knew. Mother cries every night, and I hear whispers in the halls. I felt my heartbeat slow in horror. Could Hannes have been behind these deaths? I wondered. As I read, the door suddenly slammed shut. Startled, I rushed to try to open it, but it seemed locked from the outside. Heavy footsteps echoed outside the door, growing louder as they approached. "Who's there? Open the door!" I shouted, my voice trembling with fear. There was no answer, only the persistent knocking. as if someone were trying to break down the door. Inside, my flashlight flickered and then died, leaving me in total darkness. Only the sound of my heavy breathing and the pounding of my heart filled the silence. Suddenly, a cold hand touched my shoulder. I screamed, whirling around, but saw nothing. Laughter, sharp and deranged, surrounded me, echoing off the walls. I felt a force pushing me to the floor. Struggling to my feet, I realized I had to escape immediately, summoning every ounce of strength. I threw myself against the door, and miraculously, it opened. I raced up the stairs, feeling as though something was chasing me. When I reached my room, I slammed the door shut, breathing heavily, with tears streaming down my face. That night, sleep eluded me. When I closed my eyes, I slipped into horrific nightmares. I found myself lost in a dark maze, surrounded by distorted, ghostly faces, their hands reaching out to pull me into the shadows. In the dream, Rebecca appeared, a young girl around 10, with golden hair and sorrowful eyes. "Your name is Jack, right?" Rebecca asked. "Yes, it is. Who are you?" I replied, feeling a strange calm in her presence. "I'm Rebecca. I came to warn you. Leave before it's too late." "Why? What's happening?" "My father, he doesn't want the truth revealed. His spirit remains here, and he won't stop." Before I could ask anything else, the dream faded. I woke up, drenched in cold sweat, my heart racing. Was Rebecca's spirit trying to help me? I wondered. I realized that I was being drawn into a dangerous scheme. If I continued, I might have to face Hannes Tiedemann's malevolent spirit. But if I gave up, spirits like Rebecca and Eleanor might never find peace. Determined not to abandon them, I decided to seek out Professor William Harper, a historian and expert on supernatural phenomena I'd heard of. Meeting him in his university office, I recounted the entire story. "Jack, you're up against a powerful and dangerous force," Professor Harper said, his face grave. "Hannes's spirit may have turned into a malevolent entity, preventing anyone from uncovering the truth. What should I do? I can't abandon them," I replied, my voice firm with resolve. "We need to perform a cleansing ritual to release the trapped souls. But it's dangerous. You must prepare yourself," Professor Harper said, his eyes intense and unwavering. Under the radiant full moon, silver light cast long, eerie shadows across the cold stone ground at Crybaby Bridge. Jack Thompson stood alongside Professor William Harper and Henry Miller outside the old courthouse where we planned to conduct the ritual to cleanse the spirits. The crisp night air mingled with the tension and anticipation we all felt. "We need to keep our minds clear and not let fear take over," Professor Harper said, his voice calm yet resolute. "This ritual demands intense concentration. Follow the instructions in this book closely." I nodded, feeling supported by both Professor Harper and Henry. We began gathering the necessary items: white candles to light around the bridge, a ring of sea salt to protect us from any malevolent forces, and ancient symbols Henry carefully arranged based on our research. Professor Harper opened an ancient book, reciting incantations in Latin. His voice reverberated throughout the room, blending with the soft rustling of wind through the large window panes. I felt a powerful energy emanate from the circle of candles, creating a mystical and potent atmosphere. Suddenly, the courthouse door slammed shut, causing all three of us to startle. Our flashlights flickered and then went out, leaving us in utter darkness. A chill swept through the room, carrying a faint scent of old roses. "We've begun," Professor Harper said, his voice steady amidst the stillness. In the darkness, I felt the presence of the spirits. A faint light appeared within the circle of candles, and slowly, Elizabeth Tiedemann and other spirits materialized, their faces sorrowful, eyes full of hope. "We have heard you," Elizabeth said, her voice soft but powerful. "You have come to help us find peace." I stepped forward, doing my best to stay composed. "We're sorry for the wrongs of the past. We promise to seek justice and fairness for all." Elizabeth moved closer, gratitude shimmering in her eyes. We need acknowledgement and action from the living. Only then can we rest. We will do everything we can to ensure that what happened will never be repeated. I replied, my voice filled with conviction. As Professor Harper and I finished our pledge, the figure of Hannes Tiedemann appeared, his face twisted in anger and hatred. You think you can change the past? I won't let it happen. A fierce wind whipped through the room, causing Hannes's form to flicker and fade. Justice cannot be undone by empty promises. Professor Harper continued reading, his powerful voice building a surge of light from the candle circle. The light expanded, enveloping Hannes, slowly dissolving his figure. The spirits around us began to glow, filling the room with an ethereal, otherworldly beauty. We hear you, Elizabeth said, her voice steady and filled with faith. Thank you for remembering us. A brilliant light filled the entire courthouse, casting a warm and pure glow over everything. The spirits gradually faded, leaving a profound sense of peace. At last, we can rest, Elizabeth said, her eyes brimming with serenity. Thank you for letting us help you, I replied, my voice echoing in the quiet room. The candlelight dimmed and went out, marking the end of all supernatural activity. A warm, clear atmosphere enveloped Crybaby Bridge as if a great weight had finally been lifted. The next morning, Professor Harper and I returned to the courthouse, now bathed in sunlight and a newfound calm. We knew we had succeeded in freeing the spirits and breaking the dark curse. We did it, I said, my voice full of joy. Yes, this is a crucial step in ensuring history is remembered and mistakes aren't repeated. Professor Harper replied, a gentle smile on his face. Crybaby Bridge was no longer the most haunted place in Middletown. It became a symbol of justice and hope, a place where history could be honored and remembered. I completed my photography project, not only receiving praise from the university, but also bringing a deeper understanding to the community about the tragedies that had occurred. Sitting with Henry and Professor Harper, I looked out over the bridge, illuminated by the bright moonlight above Middletown. We've made a real difference, I said, my eyes filled with hope. What happened here will never be forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey through Ohio's haunted landmarks. Whether it's the restless spirits of Franklin Castle, the eerie cries beneath Crybaby Bridge, or the shadows lurking at 9 West Avenue, these places remind us of the darkness that sometimes lingers just beneath the surface. If you enjoyed tonight's stories and crave more real-life horror and mystery, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay tuned for our next haunting tale. Until then, remember, some secrets are better left in the dark. Stay safe and keep your lights on.